So as we enter the world of animals, we're going to see a few groups emerge here. The first outgroup is the Porifera, which are the sponges. And these are included in animals because they are multicellular. So, multicellular. In addition to that, we see the invention of true tissues. The first group off of that we're going to see are the Cnidarians. And these have special types of cells called cnidocytes, which are a special type of stinging cells. Branching off of that, we've got three really huge groups of invertebrates that are going to all have bilateral symmetry. And these have two tissues, and now we're going to see three tissues. So they're going to be triploblastic. So one of these groups is called Lophotrochozoa. Sister to that, we've got Ecdysozoa. And then off of that, we've got Deuterostomia, which is going to include you and me. So all three of these together are a clade that we call bilaterans, or bilatera. If we include the Cnidarians, we will typically call this group Eumetazoa, meaning true animals. So first we'll look here at the sponges. These are closely related to a group of protists called choanoflagellates, and these are a truly multicellular body. They don't have any symmetry, they don't have any true tissues. What we do see here is some specialized cells that are working together to feed. So sponges have a couple of different types of cells. We've got choanocytes, those are these collar cells, and they're called collar cells because they've got this feeding collar here, and those line the inside of the sponge. They also have amoebocytes. So amoebocytes are these little blue guys back here, and those are able to move throughout the cell body. And between the layers of cells in the sponge is something called the mesohyal, which is not cellular, it's not organized, it's a gelatinous layer between the two layers of cells. So there's no true tissue organization here. Sponges are filter feeders, so typically what they do is they have small holes on the side of the body over here called ostia, and they draw water in through the sides of the body, and it comes into the central cavity. Sometimes they have a big central cavity, sometimes they have lots of tiny networks of cavities, and those collar cells can filter out food, and then eventually the water is projected out of the osculum. So the osculum is the big large hole at the top of the sponge that allows the water to flow back out. So these are sedentary meaning they're not getting up and moving around. Mostly live in salt water, so the oceans. There is one group of sponges that lives in freshwater. Sponges are considered hermaphrodites. So a hermaphrodite is an individual who has the capability of producing both male and female reproductive structures. And in this case, they're sequential. So they're not going to produce both at one time. So a sponge will either produce eggs or it will produce sperm, but maybe next time it reproduces, it's able to switch. And what it will do is it will release those eggs or sperm out of the osculum into the water column and then mate with adjacent sponges by floating around and mixing in the water. The next group of organisms are the Cnidarians, and the Cnidarians are going to become much more complex. They are going to start to have symmetry. So what we see here is radial symmetry, and we're also going to see now we have two tissue layers. So you can see that in these pictures here. We've got an inner yellow layer and this outer blue layer. So we've got an ectoderm and an endoderm. we start to see these true tissues creating true systems. So we've got a gastrovascular cavity. So inside of here, this is gastro meaning stomach. This is where they're going to eat and digest food. And then vascular is also going to be where they're going to get their air and remove some waste. So your vascular system is your lungs and your cardiovascular system with your heart. So they're not complex enough to need vessels or veins or anything, but they can get oxygen from the water and then send it right into their tissues. The Cnidarians typically have two body shapes, either a polyp, where the oral tend is at the top, and it's sedentary, so this is going to adhere here at the bottom, so they're not really going to move. Or we have the medusa, which has got the oral end over here on the bottom with that bell shape, which is going to allow it to be mobile and move around. One of the key characteristics of Cnidarians is these cnidocytes, and these are the stinging cells. So these nematocysts. So nematocysts are organelles inside of the cnidocytes. So here you can see a cnidocyte, and then this structure right here is the nematocyst. And when it gets triggered, so if something touches it, like your finger, what will happen is this nematocyst will whip out like a whip and cause a stinging sensation. Sometimes these have poison in them and can cause severe damage. There's two big subphyla of Cnidarians. The Medusazoa are all of the ones that produce a medusa body form. The Scyphozoa are the regular jellyfish, so those would be your typical bell-shaped jellyfish. And the Cubozoa are these box jellies that make up kind of a boxy cube instead of a bell. And these spend most of their time as medusas. They have a very, very short polyp phase when they reproduce, and then they spend the majority of their life as a medusa. The Hydrozoans often switch between medusa and polyp, so these are going to spend a little bit more time in the polyp and medusa phase. Inside of this group, we would have the Portuguese man-o-war, which is an extremely toxic symphonian or hydrozoan and not actually a true jellyfish. The cubozoans, so specifically some of the sea wasps and other cubozoans, are known for being highly toxic. So the sea wasp, for example, can cause respiratory failure and cardiac arrest within minutes by the poison that it produces and spreads throughout the body. Many jellyfish are often bioluminescent, so they would have associations with maybe some bioluminescent bacteria or algae to allow them to kind of light up underwater. The other subgroup of Cnidarians are Anthozoans, so these are going to only be polyps. So these are going to be corals, and corals form a symbiosis with some sort of photosynthetic algae. The coral creates a exoskeleton. So the actual coral polyp will secrete some sort of calcium carbonate exoskeleton that provides a nice structure. And then the algae uses photosynthesis to provide the coral with photosynthesis products such as carbon products like sugars. The other group of anthozoan are the sea anemones. So you can see my sea anemone here. And these are typically going to be a singular organism that is attached down here in the polyp shape. And they feed by grabbing onto food with their tentacles here. So rather than filter feeding, they're kind of a sit and wait predator. So they will wait for something to come by. When it swims in thinking that it's going to eat some of those nice fleshy tentacles, they will sting it and then grab it and then eat it. If you've watched Finding Nemo, you know that sea anemones can have symbiotic relationships with things like clownfish that produce a mucus that helps prevent the sea anemone from stinging them. And they exist together. The clownfish can chase away things that might eat the sea anemone, and then the sea anemone provides the clownfish with a nice little home to live in.